Welcome to Spilno TV International. My name is Damien Collodi. I'm a documentary filmmaker who's been filming here in Kyiv the past couple of weeks, and I've been working with, in cooperation with Spilno TV, to bring some English language perspective and information to Spilno TV English language viewers. Today we have a special guest. His name is Mr. Mike Perry. He's been living in Ukraine, in Kyiv, since 1995. He has various businesses here over the years, and he's been involved in all sorts of different spheres, and recently he's taken up a little bit more of an activist role. So we're going to get some of his perspective on recent events in Ukraine in general, and some of his insights that he has to offer. Well, I guess we can start with today. Today there was a march with all the foreigners who are residents of Kyiv. They had flags of their native countries. I don't know, there's probably about 300 people or so that marched through Maidan and up Institutska, up to Verkhovna Rada. I mean, what was the, I guess, objective there?
Yeah, I mean, the objective, I think, is pretty straightforward. Is there's lots of us foreigners here in Ukraine and who've made it our home. We've got family, kids, businesses, friends, and we really live here. And a lot of us just feel like we want to do something. We want to reach out and make a gesture. And Stuart McKenzie, a Scottish guy who's has a business out for a long time and has been very active in the expat community, went ahead and put it together. It was the second march. They're both very successful, and I hope we sent a message that at least those of us living in Ukraine, the expats and the foreigners here, are every bit as involved in this and every bit as emotionally involved in it as the other activists and protesters on Maidan, and want to signal that we're there, that we're there.
Yeah, and I think that message came through. I mean, we were walking around. It was pretty intense. People were clapping, thanking us. People were there was a very emotional reaction. I guess seeing all the flags of the different countries, and that in some ways it seemed like the message was the world is paying attention, even though, there was this feeling of, wow, do we really? I mean, for me, it was like they were thanking us, and there was such this intense emotional reaction, and it's like, are we really doing enough to deserve that?
Yeah.
I mean, that was my thought.
I mean, therein lies the paradox, and it was kind of a difficult march for me personally, honestly, because I don't feel like we're there for them. I'm carrying an American flag, and you were standing right next to me, and we heard it. Somebody said, "Well, now why don't you do something?" I mean, nice walk. That wasn't the atmosphere by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, everybody was grateful. There was chants of "Thank you, Doc," all over the place. People really seemed to appreciate it. I mean, I must have seen 50 babushki crying. That felt good that we were reaching out and getting the people. But even that one comment kind of confirms what I'm feeling is we expats, we're here, we understand it, we're doing our part, we're doing everything we can, even if we don't know what exactly we should be doing, and the best we can do is march and show our solidarity. And at the same time, the news from our home governments is quite the opposite. They seem to be signaling that we're not there, and just only one person was rude enough or open enough or frank enough to bark that out at us, and I think I'll remember that as much as I remember every thank you we got for the whole walk. And
well, certainly it seems like it gives some moral support to those people, because they seem very emotionally affected, even though there aren't necessarily tangible, quantifiable results from it. But it's better than staying home.
I certainly agree, and I can't be more appreciative of the people who put this thing together and the response that we got and the feeling we got, and I just hope we're not making false promises. I just feel, maybe I should be out there carrying my own self-designed flag and not an American one, because I would love for America and Obama and the top politicians and policymakers to be joining me in my sentiments, and there's a disconnect there. I don't feel like we're getting it.
Well, you have been kind of more active in posting your sentiments lately on Facebook, and you're taking an initiative to start a think tank which would display information to the West. Can you talk a little bit more about that, like what that idea is?
That's right. And, so I mean, I'm gonna have to live up to what I say here, I suppose, at some point. And this is going to be on YouTube. And and I'm desperately trying to put together a think tank and a media initiative that can hopefully add to an atmosphere which will change public opinion in the EU and change public opinion in the U.S. and start putting some grassroots policies or policies together that answer the question: how can the West help? What should they be doing? As we discussed earlier, I think that's one of the things that is missing in the Western press and Western sentiment and Western politics is people aren't really coming up with an answer to that question. Certainly not a concise and consolidated one. Somebody says sanctions. The U.S. would like to say that they just impose sanctions, but as far as I understand it, and it's hard to understand, and I read the press and I read the reports, I can't tell what those sanctions are. I can't see what they're targeting. I've heard that there's limited visa bans for people who might be, selected as the bad guys,
right.
But not systematic, and certainly nothing that the Russians. I bet they know what I know. I bet they know what I know, and that is nothing. That there's 20 people who won't be traveling to America, which they weren't planning to do in the first place.
Which is not a very effective.
Was there another sanction? I mean, do you know? I mean, was there a financial sanction?
I've just seen this general statement of sanctions. Obama's has approved sanctions, but what they are and how they're going to influence the situation isn't really clear. Other than they might boycott the G8.
Well, it seems the U.S. boycott of the G8, in so much as it's in Sochi, is foregone conclusion, and I would bet the whole thing gets called off because I don't think anybody's going. But again, you have to start from the fundamental position that when Russia sent their first message to Ukraine, when they sent their first soldier to Crimea, as soon as the Olympics ended, they canceled the reservations for the hotel of the U.S. diplomatic mission in Sochi. They knew they weren't going. Yeah. So does this provide any kind of shock? Is this truly a countermeasure? And the answer is clearly not. We've been flirting with kicking them out of the G8 for 5 years. In Georgia we did the same thing. We didn't do it. Look, they're not even a real member of the G8. I mean, this is a collection of countries who dictate the kind of are important to the financial policies, international foreign policies, and commercial flow, cash flow. Russia's in that as an observer. It seems the easiest thing in the world as a basic starting point is you guys are out of the G8 forever. Period. End of story. I mean that doesn't even start to hurt the Russian economy.
Right. It doesn't seem like they care that much.
It's a reversion to a norm. It's they have more or less observer status to begin with. It's not the kind of thing which is going to turn the soldiers around in their tracks, and it's not even going to be noticed by the Russian public. They don't even know what the G8 is or the significance of being involved in it.
Well, what do you think would be more a quantifiable response that would be more effective? I mean, you've been posting some ideas of your own on Facebook, and I imagine that this kind of think tank is going to be working along some of those lines that you've been articulating. I mean, can you talk about personally, like you've said, you've had some suggestions or thoughts of this could be an effective response.
Well, yeah. So I guess the think tank itself is going to be narrow focused, or maybe it'll spread because I don't want to dictate the total policy of the think tank. I want to get like-minded people on the think tank, and then we'll come up with policy. So I don't want to prejudice what we're actually going to be doing. But let's say if it was the Mike Perry show, I would make damn sure that France does not deliver those warships to Russia. They're $1 billion a piece, as far as I understand it. One of them is being tested on the water right now. Why in the hell was France selling warships to Russia even in the environment that was 5 years ago, let alone now? I mean, this is such an easy thing, and I believe that every Frenchman, every French woman, every French policymaker understands that that's not an appropriate thing to do. The question that I have is, do they even know that they're delivering warships? Do they even know that a NATO ally is supplying warships to Russia? Can they really deliver those things in a time when they're in violation of the sovereignty of Ukraine without any pretext? The whole world's agreed on this. Can we allow France to deliver those things? Okay, this seems like an easy target. Will that hurt Russia? Will that hurt? It's not even being discussed. Why isn't that a real topic? U.S. supplying gas to Europe to compensate. This is something that Russia will immediately know the fear that it will be a real attack on their economy. Banking freezes is another thing we do. I mean, one of the ideas that I know would work, and I have no idea, again, nobody's going to believe this. Nobody's going to do it. And the public sentiment is not there, and I have no idea why not. Just a 100% cancellation of all existing Russian visas and a ban on new visas to everybody, tourists, business, otherwise. Not one Russian gets a EU visa, and believe me, it'll work. The Russians will have 1,000-person protest in 1,000 cities, so much that the Russian police even won't be able to put them down. The Russians don't want to live in an isolated world, and they don't want to invade Ukraine. When you hit the people, you hit their money. They can't get to it in Europe. That's from the elites. You hit the middle class. I mean, I have friends in Russia right now who are planning to go to a windsurfing contest in Tenerife. They could win, and they can't go anymore. They can't go. These are normal people who are generally against this invasion anyways, whose attention isn't narrow focused on it because they're going to have a nice vacation in Tenerife and they're going to go kite surfing and hope to come home with the pride of a medal. These are people who are going to quickly refocus their attention. The fact that this isn't even being discussed, that we're doing targeted visa bans, is to me is just a wasted opportunity. We understand who the Russians are. We understand what's going to motivate them. We understand they can do it. And in the old world, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, when there was an acknowledgement of an actual violation of sovereignty, a war, didn't people and nations do such creative things as this? And I don't understand how we came into such a bureaucratic knot, that the domestic politics has turned into such a soft thing that it can't have room for creative solutions which will work, which will not a drop of blood. Sure, will they escalate the situation? Will Russia counter with its own measures? Will it harass U.S. and European businesses? Will trade go down? Okay, yes.
Well,
let's do that.
But it goes to show that maybe the will to do that isn't there, and maybe Europe and the West doesn't feel that they have much at stake in Ukraine or in the situation, where in other situations they have. There's no.
Yeah,
correct. And they probably, it will influence them more than they think right now. But right now they feel like, well, let's have Russia takes Crimea. It's not our problem. We don't have to get our hands too messy. As long as Putin stays out of Ukraine proper.
I mean, look at it. I mean, and that's that. And I can kind of put my signature and pencil on that. They're kind of right about that. If Russia just takes Crimea, I mean, I know very many Ukrainians who feel it's not worth a war over. I know there is a messy history of why Russia is going to Crimea, because there is because of their own population, because of their own genocides, whatever it is. But people will vote in favor of Crimea joining Russia right now. It's no secret. I mean, if you go down and poll and do an honest poll, the majority of Crimeans would want to be Russia or independent today. That's an easy piece of information for the West to digest.
Yeah.
Where's our national interest in that? Why is that what we're taking a claim? Okay, what they're missing is the next phase, and that is, okay, well, first of all, of course, that's if Crimea goes to Russia by referendum, which is clearly against the Constitution of Ukraine, not a single Western government or UN nation is going to recognize Crimea as Russian or independent, as long as Ukraine recognizes it as Ukraine. So now we have an open festering wound in Europe on the Black Sea. That's in a relatively important socioeconomic and political sphere. I mean, it's a geopolitically important piece of real estate. There is natural resources there. I mean, Shell has a contract to drill out there. So all of a sudden we have the messiness of dealing with the commercial situation. That's going to be a pressure. We have the Crimean Tatar population and the Ukrainian opposition who is going to fight guerrilla war. It's a foregone conclusion. I mean, don't ask me, ask them. They were there today. They said it. They said it loud and clear. Their leadership is calling upon Azerbaijan, Turkey, and the other regional Muslim nations for support. Those nations should be expected to support it. Turkey could close the Bosporus to Russian commercial. So now where do we go with this? Is now all of a sudden. Now do we see this becoming an international issue? Do we now see American interests at stake? Because if there's a guerrilla war where the Crimean Tatars are fighting the Russians in Crimea for a land that we believe is still to be Ukraine, that we still recognize as Ukraine, and they're being supported by Turkey, do you think the CIA is staying out of that? Do you think we're not going to arm that insurgency? Now, what does that sound like to you? Country gets taken and invaded by Russia. Insurgency armed by a Muslim ally, supplied weapons by the CIA and covert operations from the U.S., Taliban, Afghanistan. This is Afghanistan all over again. And does America really have the stomach to arm Muslim insurgents in Crimea right now? Does Turkey have to do that? Do we need a Muslim insurgency, even if they're fighting the Russians, which is kind of, kicking the balls. We like that. Good. But we've made this mistake before. Do we need to radicalize, a population which is perfectly happy to be Ukrainian and is completely integrated into the socio-economic structures of the land where they live, and all of a sudden we're going to alienate them? Is this not American national interest? I mean, is last I looked, kind of the war against terror is still at the top of our list of security threats.
Yeah.
And we're just, there's so many reasons. Okay, the main reason, and I'm not the first person to say this, it's a popular branch of opinion in op-eds, is this is empire building by Russia. And they're not building an empire by providing a political, economic, and social system which people are buying into and would like to enter. They're doing it the old way, by force.
But some people might say, well, it's a referendum, so if the people there want to be part of it, the majority of people want, what's wrong with that? I mean, that might be that's the Russian counter argument. I mean, my understanding of the referendum is that, well, obviously there's mass gunmen who took over the parliament building in the Crimea and appointed a new government, just like that. So not everyone may know that. And the referendum itself, also has, my understanding is it only has two options to vote. Either Crimea becomes independent or it joins Russia now. Right. There's no option for the status quo.
Right, correct. Right.
So it's...
Yeah, I mean, look at it. So the way that Russia is going about its business in Crimea is disgusting. I mean, it's so far outside of like modern civilized political behavior that it goes beyond explanation. I can't sit here and tell you. I mean, everybody knows it. The first thing that a friendly country does when they come and save their people is shut down all the media. Yeah, okay, that's nice. And they go in there and they start like surrounding bases. They start, oh, you guys are so welcome and so liked, but you have to come in with a military response. So there's certainly, I think there's, there's a term for it. People before Russia got there, yes, they would have polled that they would have said they would rather be Russian or independent. Now, there's good reason why people aren't listening to those polls, of course, because you can't have the minority Tatar population, which was annihilated under the Soviet regime. You can't all of a sudden the second time do this to them. This is their homeland. There is more reasons why this must remain in a state which is acceptable to that large minority population. Besides that, there's the Ukrainian population, which is now a minority population, but. Then you go to the 94 treaty. This was foreseen. This was understood. You go to 91, they got Crimea. That was the time to stake your claim to it. That was the time for the referendum. That was it. It's over. Yeah. Maps, if maps move in that way, then, there's probably a fifth of the nations on planet Earth have a section of it which feels that they would be better off as a separate population or would like to join another country. And I'm sorry, that's just balagan, man. It's a mess. You can't do that. We can't start that here. We can't start it anywhere. And we certainly can't start it with, the immoral leadership of a KGB operative who's doing it for nostalgia, ego, and money. It could be done, let's say in 15 years down the road, Ossetia and Abkhazia. Georgia reforms, Georgia joins NATO, Georgia joins the EU. That's what they're doing now. They're moving on the fast track towards a civilized country where the stores look good, the ambulances save you, and you can have a good quality of life. Georgia's going to achieve that. Abkhazia and Ossetia are still going to be stuck in a mud puddle that's called Russia. They're going to be caught in this limbo. They're not recognized by anybody, and sooner or later they're just going to, on their own free will, want to go the other direction. And that's a scenario which is a Crimean scenario as well, where we can actually charm them back into our sphere. But are we going to be able to? Are we going to let Russia keep gobbling up the dots? Are we going to let people continue fall to this to this authoritarian regime? And that's what everybody's talking about. Is if we forfeit Crimea without a fight, well then what stops Donetsk? Maybe today there's not the public will for it, maybe there's not the will in the Russia, but the lesson is well learned and set. So now all they need to do is finance the opposition or the pro-Russian opposition, and get them back into political relevance, make dirty deals with oligarchs, and keep the territory in play. They don't have the means to do it today, but what about next year? What about the year after that? And of course,
that's a precedent.
Of course, you have the logical response in the former Warsaw Pact nations. The Poles, the Czechs, the Baltics are of course saying right now, whoa, we have a larger Russian ethnic population than Crimea does. So this policy that you're talking about applies to us. Those are NATO nations. NATO has to be looking at it the same way as well. We have Chapter 4, Chapter 5 alliances with these people. If this happens in the Baltic nations, we have to go to war. That to me seems like a U.S. national interest. That seems to me a EU national interest. If we don't see our own economics there, sure, our trade is not that big a deal to the Baltic or to the Black Sea region. Sure, we don't have historical cultural ties. Sure, we've never had our flag there. I mean, there's all the arguments people say that this is not our problem. Well, there are reasons that you can say it is becoming our problem, and there's an obvious track where it does become our problem. So, okay, forget about just the fluffy egalitarian moral issues that we would like to do something humane for people who deserve it. The old-fashioned
Right.
World War II thing where we want to save people who are being oppressed. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about it from a U.S. lens. Why should the U.S. want to be there? Well, the very fact is because act today or pay tomorrow, and the price is cheaper today than it will be tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's the compelling evidence that I would like to try and, with this think tank, that's stage one, is to get that perspective as the counterbalance to the what can we do? Why should we do anything? So we want to do two things. We want to try and spread the word of what the national interests are, make a convincing case for that, and then we want to say what are the specific steps that can be taken that would work against Putin 2014.
Well, going back to. Well, Georgia is going to develop separately from Abkhazia, and people in Crimea want, have an interpretation of reality that is fed by the Russian mass media, and it seems to be very effective in distorting the truth or the events in Kyiv, the perspective.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about how that has had an influence on that region and
how Russia has influenced Crimea to think Russian.
And the information coming out towards the world. Even the West is interpreting some of this, about, their pretext was, there's extremists in Kyiv and we need to protect our citizens. That was their basis for coming in.
I think a really fortunate thing has happened, honestly. In this particular case, the Kremlin propaganda machine has got some scratches on the records. They're really blowing it. They've put out such absurd lies in this time that they haven't convinced their own people. Not a single person in Crimea is convinced of that stuff. I got to take that back because I've seen some reporting to the alternative, but to the opposite. But listen, it's been real sloppy. And it's been a unique experience, and of course this has to do with social media and instant access to information. That the Kremlin lies are falling on deaf ears in the West. They're falling on deaf ears in Donetsk. They're falling on deaf ears in Kharkiv. Sure, there are still people who want to believe it just because it's Russia, and they're fundamentally on that side of the deal. They want to be Russian. They like Russia. They're a devil's advocate. They're contrarians. They would good. Even though I don't believe it, I'm going to support Russia anyways. There's lots of that going on inside Russia as well. But if you take the Crimean example, of course, since the Georgian War, that was the first time they started handing out passports, to giving citizenship to Crimean citizens to swing that way. They have been having cultural influence over Crimea for a long time. The Russian population is. Of course, there's a genocide of the native people, so basically they repopulated it. So if you look back in just general fairness of why should it be Crimea, why should it be Ukrainian, why should it be Tatar, it's easy to come up with a moral and ethical argument. It's like, well, yeah, because you guys did that genocide thing, and then you populated with Russians. So, that's some foresight you guys had because it worked. I give you credit for that. It worked. You guys repopulated with Russians, and now you're going to get a referendum which says it wants to be Russia. So let's just rule it out on those grounds. That's not right. We don't allow that kind of behavior on planet Earth. I think that's a completely fair argument. I don't know how much traction it's going to get.
Yeah.
It happens to be absolutely true, but it's really well balanced out by the fact that but those people do live there. They are alive. They do eat food, and they do go to sleep at night, and they're the people that live there, and they want to be Russian. I'm not going to try and draw a black and white line here. There is some argument, and there are lots of people in Ukraine that say, better not to lose any lives about this. And there is a certain theory that says, and I give credibility. I don't know if I agree with it or not, but Putin's going to have a massive problem if he takes Crimea. If that is Crimea is Russian, does he really want it? He does want it. There are economic benefits. He can go straight through the island with the gas lines, or the peninsula with the gas lines instead of going around it. I've heard that's a $15 billion savings to them. yeah, that's cool. They get some of the shale. There's lots of shale down there, so their energy resources are there. The main thing he wants to do is he wants to send a message. He wants to say, I still own this neighborhood. This is my sphere of influence. I am the guy. Kiss my ring. Okay, let him have it, because the UN's not going to recognize it as Russia. So Ukraine gets it back when? In 2 years? 5 years? 12 years? 20 years? It's coming back. Believe me, Russia is not going to keep it. It will never, never, never be recognized as Russia. And that's another message that I think my think tank would like to get out is, if that's loud and clear, if the entirety of the UN is decided, it says, like, we know what you're doing, we see what's coming, it's happening, and you kind of won for now, but you will never have a document which says that is Russia. Putin kind of already knows that. What is he going to have? He's going to have a resource drain. He's going to have a guerrilla insurgency going on there. He's going to have, as long as as long as that is Russian territory, he's going to have a PR problem with the international community. That's going to be isolated. It could lead to creeping sanctions. He's not scared of the immediate sanctions because we just haven't been stiff enough. But we did stiffen up on Iran, for example, over a long period of time, and they finally did have some effect. Does he have to worry about that? Does he have to worry about the interest of foreign direct investment because he's now just such a mafia bandit that he's so ruthless that people are going to just be pulling their money out or not investing further? What resources is he going to have to dedicate to making Crimea successful and taking it onto its economy? Yeah, let that wound fester. That's one way to do it. Is he's probably going to lose that. That will probably be such an ankle weight, such a shackle to his presidency, and it will probably be generally unpopular, come election time. There is some argument to say that. I heard someone else said, like, why don't we just ask him for, I think they said like $50 billion, buy it.
Yeah.
We kind of agree with your referendum. It's ours, though, right? Right now you recognize ours. Isn't that your signature on the document that says, you're part of the UN in 1994? So we'll sell it to you. It's for sale.
Because he doesn't feel like he needs to. He's in a position where he has the leverage. The Russian, they have 30,000 troops on Crimea right now, and how many? The Ukrainian bases seem to be pretty ineffective. What about the Ukrainian response? The guys are there. They haven't switched sides or given up their arms, but they're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
And what's happening at the borders? If he goes in there, is that going to give him courage, or is he going to feel like, well, I can keep going and go into eastern Ukraine? And is the Ukrainian military? I don't know. Are they fortifying the borders? What's your take on the Ukrainian response?
Yeah, well, I'm not a military expert. I've been following it as much as I can, but I've heard that a few kind of mobilizations have happened. There's been a mobilization in Lviv as of today. I just read reports before this interview that the army is mobilizing out of Lviv. I've seen, with my own eyes, I've seen repositioning of military assets just going down the highways in Kyiv. So they have been moving around. The U.S. of course made the move of moving, what was it, a dozen F-16s to Poland, and bringing a new destroyer into the Black Sea. What's going on backstage with the military planning, I don't know, but it's of course like both the U.S., the EU, or all three of the EU, NATO, and Ukraine have been very reserved in any kind of saber rattling, because the board is set up against Ukraine right now. As I've heard from the people who know the military movements and what assets the Russians have in place and where the Ukrainians are, is if we were to fight, the Ukrainians were to fight on the northeastern border, it would be an immediate annihilation. They're just outnumbered and outgunned. Yeah. And in order to have any kind of success, they would really need to pull back to the Dnieper. In order to have any kind of military success, which of course everybody knows that the Ukrainian army is not well equipped and not well trained. They may be well motivated at this point. That's the only advantage they might have. But unless they're got a clear indication from NATO in the West that there's going to be support, active support, I think the policy has been, and it appears to be, that we need to stand down and not have any provocations. that strategy has been brilliant so far in Crimea specifically. The unarmed march was just a moment of heroic brilliance in so many ways, and the discipline of the soldiers to keep their posts, but not to give the Russian anything to react to. Whether the reporting was true or not, Putin is very upset that he hasn't gotten the provocation he's looking for. Now, if that
there was that phone call, which
I'm not buying it.
Yeah.
But even if that phone call didn't happen, it was speaking the truth. Of course, it's what he wants to happen. I mean, provocatia has been the main KGB instrument. It's the first one gets the first club out of the bag.
So the phone call for
every team.
Someone who may not know about it, it was just a phone call that was allegedly recorded that was between Putin and one of his generals saying, "What's going on? Why aren't they shooting back? Or why aren't they shooting?" And he said, "They're just not." And Putin asked, "Well, are you provoking them?" And the general said, "Yes, we are. And they're just telling us to get out of here, to buzz off." But, so essentially Putin was looking for the Ukrainians to fire the first shot by having his soldiers provoke that kind of reaction, because that gives him reason to go in full force.
Right. So we can assume that if that conversation was real or wasn't real, that conversation happened. I mean, and you can assume that was that wasn't an accident. Since it's such an old trick from the KGB bag, of tricks that the Ukrainians are smart enough to have seen that coming, foreseen that, and they made sure that they didn't give them what they were looking for. And the other thing that happened, again, in this PR war, I really feel like the Kremlin's doing a terrible job in the West, and Ukraine is doing a great job, is that they've very, very early on, the second that there was not any concept idea whatsoever that it might be some military provocation or invasion of Crimea. Listen, everybody starts regurgitating the old stories of how the Russians work. They're going to shoot one of their own citizens. They're going to blow up an apartment building with a Russian family in it. They're going to send in Russian tourists who get beat up. They're going to blow up one of their own ships. We know they were going to do that. Everybody knows that they were going to do that. Everyone who lives in this part of the world, that is. Now, people who live in the United States and Europe might not particularly, believe that they do that, because we have that same story in the U.S. We blew up our own trade centers. We did this, and those things really don't get traction because we kind of know each other, and we don't do that. But in Russia, they know each other, and they do that.
Yeah.
And I think that the Ukrainians were effective in battling the false pretext on this particular, and they implemented a policy. And I think the Russians couldn't do the provocation in this case because there was too many cameras, too much YouTube, too many cell phones that could record this, too many people looking for that evidence, and too many people predicting it. And if they did do it, they would certainly look like fools. Nobody was going to believe it. Like they don't believe, the mass migration of refugee migrations. No one's believing it. They're not believing that these aren't Russian soldiers. I mean, the lies are just so outrageous this time that they've kind of ruined their own pretext.
No.
And I think that's been a very strong line of defense for Ukraine in this, in the battle. I think that's probably has a lot to do with why they no longer have immediate ambitions to go into Donetsk, because the Donetsk people are, they smell a.
Yeah, so some of that Russian information has been that they were saying that there's thousands of refugees fleeing from Ukraine to Russia, and they showed a picture of the border, and it was the Polish border. It wasn't the border with Russia. They showed fights from Kyiv between demonstrators and police, and claimed that it was happening in the Crimea. And I think, there's a couple other examples I can't think of right now, but they were just really,
the defection of Ukrainian soldiers. They said that the entire battalions had thrown down their arms and joined the Russians and the local self-defense forces. Yeah. And it again, widely reported. I can't verify 100% from my own experience, but because I haven't seen the smoking gun, but there was reports that the Russians were buying and going to essentially their version of Army Navy stores and buying Ukrainian uniforms so that they could film themselves jumping ship and defecting, so they'd have video footage of it. And again, the idea was they did it so in such a sloppy form that they got caught. The social media was there to catch it. There's just a lot more people making a lot more reporting. Traditional old-fashioned media can't have a camera everywhere, but the internet can. So they kind of made fools of themselves, trying to pull this off in a modern era.
Just saying that those aren't necessarily Russian soldiers. You can buy those uniforms. I mean, these are guys with heavy automatic weapons and tanks, and it's kind of a silly statement.
The thing is, they had their agents out there in the stores buying this stuff, and then passing it along to people to putting them in Ukrainian uniforms so they could actually shoot footage of them kind of flee, and that was the idea, and it just fell on a completely flat audience. But again, the Ukrainian side and some of the private sector and the government sector, it's been a good teamwork. There's lots of good internet sites, Spilno being one of them, who are just exposing these things. There's 3 or 4 really good sites which stopfake.org, I think is one of them. Yeah. Every time they try this, it's an instant reaction to Kremlin propaganda, and they're nailing them every time, and they've been doing a pretty good job of getting that story out, I have to say.
But is it getting out to the Russians?
No, but it is a little bit. Again, I've talked to friends in Russia, and I've looked for their perspectives on this, and in the modern urbanites, in the affluent, kind of middle class, in the big cities, the ones that I know, they're not buying any of it. I mean, they know exactly what's going on, and they're not happy about it. I don't know if they're as mad about it as somebody who's like in the crosshairs, but the propaganda isn't working. I mean, they understand who Putin is. They understand what the Kremlin is. They understand what they do. They've done it domestically. They've done it against them. I mean, these are the people who would have stood with Kasparov or some of the opposition politicians. So they've seen those tactics against their own people. So they're not trying to
But that's not the case of the Russians in Crimea. No, they are really aggressive and intent. That their understanding of reality of truth is what the Russian media is saying, and you hear it over and over.
I'm afraid you're right,
and it's kind of scary because it's hard to have any sort of dialogue with them, and they're very aggressive.
I'm afraid you're right. I mean, I can say not much more than that. I talked to a journalist who was down there, and I read. I think Time had a really good. I think a Time magazine reporter was down there and asked. They said something like 18 people off the street in a row. Their version of events in Kyiv, and all 18 of them seemed to be genuinely convinced that the U.S. was financing Maidan, and that there was the majority of the protest was ultra-nationalist, and that there was, I think if I'm trying to be specifically, I'm paraphrasing of course, but that they believed that swastikas played a prominent role. So the people in Crimea, evidencing that they're retarded. Sorry, I forgot we don't use that word anymore. But they believe that the U.S. was financing Nazis, people with swastikas. I mean, it's just an insane notion. But this Time reporter had met 18 people in a row who she felt believed that at a core level.
Yeah.
Something that absolutely could never happen, and everybody knows. I mean, and anybody who was on Maidan saw that it didn't happen. So it's amazing that story didn't get to Crimea. It's not very far away. But I'm afraid you're right. It didn't, and there's credible evidence that those guys are actually mad.
It's generating a lot of hate, false.
Yes.
Falsely targeted hate.
I'm afraid you're right.
Yeah, and that's really what makes the situation.
And unlike my kind of proposed foundation's mission of changing public opinion, I can't reach Crimea. I don't even know how to start, and I don't think anybody does. They took down all the internet. They took down all the objective media. It's just gone. There's no communication routes they can get in and out of there. They completely control it. So it's I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to count on a groundswell of popular support in Crimea to carry the flag of Ukraine and promote your and my interests in that particular arena.
Yeah, so it makes the whole situation really difficult.
It makes the whole situation really difficult
because you have that much internal support, whether it's kind of fabricated in a way. But
that's correct. That's correct. That's correct. But that's not an argument to let it go. Again, I feel like if we don't escalate the situation, we being Ukraine and the West, we don't escalate the situation in Crimea, that just leads to Putin's ability to synthesize information, understand the weakness, and continue to march. I mean, why does he stop? We have to give him the reason to stop. He isn't. He lost his mind, or he didn't. He's stupid, or he's not. I don't believe that he's lost his mind. I don't believe he's stupid. I believe that he has a good understanding of the tactics he's deploying. I believe they're working. I believe he's accomplishing his goals, and I believe that he will have an increased appetite to continue in his quest to dominate the region, starting with eastern Ukraine and Kyiv, if he is unopposed in Crimea.
Yeah.
And I think that is an important issue to address when we say, is it a solution to sell Crimea, to give it away, to let it go into his hands and fester, to laugh at him, make it his problem? These are all reasonable things. These are all reasonable things for people to say. I think the more reasonable response is we have to escalate there in order to prevent against him, and going further into Ukraine, and of course then the other countries that might be in the distant follow up, the Baltics. A reasserted Russian sphere of influence is bad for everybody, and we're gonna need to fight it somewhere at some time, and I think it's better to fight it now than tomorrow.
Well, it seems like the Baltic countries and Poland are pretty aware of that kind of potential threat that it is to them, and if there was some military engagement, that they would be willing to support Ukraine, and that is kind of the sentiment that I've been hearing.
Well, support, yeah. I haven't heard direct. I don't know what they do directly. I mean, it gets real tricky. Those are NATO countries. So.
Well, so let's switch back to Kyiv for a little bit. I mean, the new government, they've been in office a couple of days. No one's been arrested or prosecuted for any of the events that happened on Maidan. People are frustrated that clearly they have their hands full with this Russia situation. I mean, how do you think the new government response has been thus far? From you spoke about that you've had some conversations with people in regions, and
I mean, I think there's a lot of positive things coming out, and some of them that I think are even more positive than I expected. Yep.
Oh, we're done? All right.
Good.
Yeah, how long did we go for? Jak dlouho mi pішли? Oh, it's just 7 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us, and thanks, Mike, for sharing your views, and hopefully you get your think tank going and keep continuing getting some of your ideas and information out there to the West. Please join us again next time for Spilno International. Thanks for watching and caring about the situation in Ukraine.
Yeah.